All right, so we left off here on the second column of this page. And note, too, that Blake has retrieved from the Bible the biblical double column structure in his parody here. And then so we resume with chapter 5 here. Let's see. In terrors, Los shrunk from his task. His great hammer fell from his hand. His fires beheld, and sickening, hid their strong limbs in smoke. For with noises ruinous loud, with hurtlings and clashings and groans, the immortal endured his chains, though bound in a deadly sleep. All the myriads of eternity, all the wisdom and joy of life, roll like a sea around him, except what his little orbs of sight by degrees unfold, and now his eternal life, like a dream, was obliterated. Shuddering, the eternal prophet smote with a stroke from his north to south region. The bellows and hammer are silent now, a nerveless silence his prophetic voice seized, a cold solitude and dark void, the eternal prophet and Urizen closed. Ages on ages rolled over them, cut off from life and light, frozen into horrible forms of deformity. Los suffered his fires to decay, then he looked back with anxious desire, but the space undivided by existence struck horror into his soul. Los wept obscured with mourning, his bosom earthquaked with sighs. He saw Urizen deadly black, in his chains bound, and pity began. Now pity, as he feels the emotion of pity, is going to divide from him to become Enid Harmon, whom he produces parthenogenically. In anguish dividing and dividing, for pity divides the soul. In pangs eternity on eternity, life in cataracts poured down his cliffs. The void shrunk the lymph into nerves, wandering wide on the bosom of night, and left a round globe of blood trembling upon the void. And then so we have, thus the eternal prophet was divided before the death image of Urizen for unchangeable clouds and darkness in a winterly night beneath. The abyss of loss stretched immense, and now seen, now obscured to the eyes of eternals, the vision remote. And here they are. Here's Los and Urizen creating. Of the dark separation appeared, as glasses discover worlds, that is to say telescopes, in the endless abyss of space, so the expanding eyes of immortals beheld the dark visions of loss and the globe of lifeblood trembling. All right, and then so for the next page, there's the globe of lifeblood trembling. And then we want, let's see. Boy, they don't make this easy. Okay, here you are. The image of Los here with his hammer. The globe of lifeblood trembled, branching out into roots. Fibrous, writhing upon the winds. Fibers of blood, milk, and tears. In pangs, eternity on eternity. At length in tears and cries embodied a female form, trembling and pale, waves before his deathly face. So this is his sister, Enid Harmon. All eternity shuddered at sight of the first female, now separate, pale as a cloud of snow, waving before the face of Los. Wonder, awe, fear, astonishment petrified the eternal myriads at the first female form, now separate. They called her pity and fled. Let's see where they are here. The image of them being completely separate here. The female form separated out from Los, and they are going to beget Orc, the fiery spirit of rebellion who made his first appearance in Blake's poem America, a Prophecy. They called her pity and fled. And so the immortals say, spread a tent with strong curtains around them. Let cords and stakes bind in the void, that eternals may no more behold them. They began to weave curtains of darkness. They erected large pillars round the void, with golden hooks fastened in the pillars. With infinite labor the eternals a woof wove, and called it science. And so they are abhorred by them. And so what they want to do is create a tent of science, which they erect over them. The eternals do. And science for Blake is something which distorts abstract reasoning, completely distorts it. And then, so what will happen is that your reason will then want to create the web or the net of religion, which is another thing that captures the human mind and distorts it. Chapter 6, but Los saw the female and pitied. He embraced her, she wept. She refused in perverse and cruel delight. She fled from his arms, yet he followed. Eternity shuddered when they saw man begetting his likeness on his own divided image. And so now, like Adam and Eve giving birth to Cain and Abel, here they give birth to Orc. So they're having sex. Eternity shuddered when they saw man begetting his likeness on his own divided image. So they're abhorred by the image of two humans fucking, and so that's what inspires them to build a tent. A time passed over. The Eternals began to erect a tent, when Enid Harmon, sick, felt a worm within her womb. Yet helpless it lay like a worm in the trembling womb to be molded into existence. All day the worm lay on her bosom, all night within her womb. The worm lay till it grew to a serpent with dolorous hissings and poisons round Enid Harmon's loins, folding. Coiled within Enid Harmon's womb, the serpent grew, casting its scales. With sharp pangs the hissings began to change to a grating cry. Many sorrows and dismal throes. So he comes out of her vagina as a serpent, Orc does, at first anyway. With the sharp pangs and the hissings began to change to a grating cry. Many sorrows and dismal throes. Many forms of fish-burdened beast brought forth an infant form where was a worm before. The Eternals their tent finished, alarmed with these gloomy visions, when Enid Harmon, groaning, produced a man-child to the light. A shriek ran through eternity, and a paralytic stroke at the birth of the human shadow. Delving earth in his resistless way, howling, the child with fierce flames issued from Enid Harmon. The Eternals closed the tent. They beat down the stakes and the cords. And then so... Well, the text is hard to read. Stretched for a work of eternity, no more loss beheld eternity. In his hands he seized the infant. He bathed him in springs of sorrow. He gave him to Enid Harmon. They named the child Orc. He grew fed with milk of Enid Harmon. Loss awoke her. Oh, sorrow and pain! A tightening girdle grew around his bosom. In sobbings he burst the girdle in twain, but still another girdle oppressed his bosom. In sobbings again he burst it. Again another girdle succeeds. The girdle was formed by day, by night was burst in twain. And so that what they do here, and there's an image that Blake provides of them chaining him to a rock. And here the couple, Enid Harmon and Laz. Laz is here with his chain of jealousy now. He's jealous of his offspring. And here's the man-child here. You can see Laz with his hammer. And then this is Enid Harmon at the top of a mountain. And that chain they're going to put on the child, on Orc, to just like the chaining of Prometheus. These falling down on the rock into an iron chain in each other, link by link locked. They took Orc to the top of a mountain, just like Prometheus, who's taken to the top of a mountain. Oh, how Enid Harmon wept. They chained his young limbs to the rock with the chain of jealousy beneath Urizen's deathful shadow. Let's go back to the text. The dead heard the voice of the child and began to awake from sleep. All things heard the voice of the child and began to awake to life. And Urizen, craving with hunger, stunned with the odors of nature, explored his dens around. He formed a line and a plummet to divide the abyss beneath. And that's that image of the Ancient of Days, with Urizen reaching down with a geometer's compass to divide the abyss. He formed scales to weigh. He formed massy weights. He formed a brazen quadrant. He formed golden compasses and began to explore the abyss. And he planted a garden of fruits. But Laz encircled Enid Harmon with fires of prophecy from the sight of Urizen and Orc. And she bore an enormous race. So he's also the spirit of prophecy. And the spirit of prophecy is, of course, Blake's forte. And then so now, Urizen will now carry a sun, the material sun, as a lamp that he sort of drags along to illuminate his way as he goes. Urizen explored this is chapter 8. Urizen explored his dens, mountain, moor, and wilderness, with a globe of fire lighting his journey, a fearful journey, annoyed by cruel enormities, forms of life on his forsaken mountains. And his world teemed vast enormities, frightening, faithless, fawning portions of life, similitudes of a foot or a hand or a head or a heart or an eye. They swam mischievous dread terrors, delighting in blood. So we get the human being now appearing in all these different parts, like a state of disorganization that needs to be organized, kind of like Lacan's idea of the mirror stage, in his idea that the infant has a disorganized sense of himself until he first sees himself in a mirror, and once that happens, then he sees himself as an organized unity. Most Urizen sicken to see his eternal creations appear, and so now he gives birth to these creatures that are personifications of the four elements. And Blake specifically is alluding back to Hesiod's theogony with Gaia, parthenogenically creating her brood of titans, as Urizen is still, because he doesn't have a consort yet. Ahania doesn't appear until the next book, the book of Ahania. He's creating parthenogenically. So most Urizen sicken to see his eternal creations appear, sons and daughters of sorrow on mountains, weeping, wailing. First, Tyrael appeared, astonished at his own existence, like a man from a cloud born, so he's air. And Utha, from the waters emerging, laments, so she's water. Grodna rent the deep earth, howling, amazed, his heaven's immense cracks, like the ground parched with heat. Grodna is the earth, and then Fuson flamed out, first begotten, last born. And so he's first begotten because when we initially saw him in the void, with the elements in his mind, they were mental structures, and fire is the first of those traditionally. Traditionally, it always goes fire because it's the lightest and most rarefied of the four elements, then down to earth, then down to water, then down to water, then down to earth. So fire, air, water, earth is the proper sequence. Here the sequence is jumbled a bit because it starts with Tyrael, who is air, and then Uta, who is water, then Grodna, who is earth, then Fuson, who is fire. And Fuson now will, in the book of Ahania, castrate him. He will be a personification both of Moses, attempting to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, but at the same time a personification of Kronos, who castrates Uranus. And from that, Ahania will be born just as Aphrodite is born from the genitals of Uranus. So he in darkness closed, viewed all his race, and his soul sickened. He cursed both sons and daughters, for he saw that no flesh nor spirit could keep his iron laws one moment. For he saw that life lived upon death, as indeed it does. And then so we get a couple of images here. Let's see, the text resumes here. With his creations here, I suppose, coming out of the earth and the water. The ox in the slaughterhouse moans, the dog at the wintry door, and he wept, and he called it pity, and his tears flowed down on the winds. So Urizen is moved by compassion for the strife of these four elements, from which life will begin the process of eating itself. Everything that is alive has to kill something else to eat it, which is why Schopenhauer condemned life as a mistake, which I agree with him. I believe that it is a mistake. It's based on suffering. Cold he wandered on high over their cities, in weeping and pain and woe. And wherever he wandered in sorrows upon the aged heavens, a cold shadow followed behind him, like a spider's web, moist, cold, and dim. And so now, like a spider's web, so now just as the Eternals have created the tent of science, which they erected around the Adam and Eve figures, or Los and his sister consort Enid Harmon and their child Orc, so now Urizen will create the web or the net of religion, which will also cast its shadow over humanity. But it will make possible civilization, and so Egypt comes into being as the first civilization here. In weeping and pain and woe, and wherever he wandered in sorrows upon the aged heavens, a cold shadow followed behind him, like a spider's web, moist, cold, and dim, drawing out from his sorrowing soul the dungeon-like heaven dividing, wherever the footsteps of Urizen walked over the cities in sorrow, till a web, dark and cold throughout all the tormented elements, stretched from the sorrows of Urizen's soul. None could break the web, no wings of fire. So twisted the cords, and so knotted the meshes, twisted like to the human brain, and all called it the net of religion, which Blake sees as something that is sinister. And so we're on the right-hand column here. You can see chapter 9, but that's about all you can make out Then the inhabitants of those cities felt their nerves change into marrow, and hardening bones began, and swift diseases and torments. So now disease comes into being, which indeed disease probably does with the Neolithic settlement into agrarian societies. Once you are rooted in place, then you become subject to all sorts of barnyard animal diseases, pigs and chickens and so forth, stagnant water, mosquitoes, in throbbings and shootings and grindings through all the coasts, till weakened the senses inward rushed, shrinking beneath the dark net of infection. Till the shrunken eyes clouded over discerned not the woven hypocrisy, but the streaky slime in their heavens, brought together by narrowing perceptions, appeared transparent air. For their eyes grew small, like the eyes of a man, and in reptile forms, shrinking together, of 7 feet stature they remain. So they're still like the giants, the Nephilim in the book of Genesis. They're 7 feet tall, but they are gradually shrinking. This is a little bit like a physical version of Rudolf Steiner's idea as we move through the Atlantis phase, where human beings had etheric bodies that hung out over them, these gigantic auras that gradually shrank over time as human consciousness evolved and developed a sense of individuality and the beginnings of reason. So too they lost their clairvoyant abilities in direct proportion to that. 6 days, and now note that we have 6 days, whereas before we had 6 ages, replicating God's creation of the earth in 6 days. 6 days they shrunk up from existence, and on the 7th day they rested, and they blessed the 7th day in sick hope, and forgot their eternal life. And their 30 cities divided. Alexander the Great was said to have created 30 cities through the course of his campaigns. And also Jair gave his 30 sons 30 cities in Gilead in the book of Judges. And their 30 cities divided in form of a human heart. And so this human heart is the shape of Africa. Blake looks at the African continent and he sees it in the shape of a heart. In form of a human heart, no more could they rise at will in the infinite void, but bound down to earth by their narrowing perceptions, they lived a period of years, then left a noisome body to the jaws of devouring darkness. And so we are on the last page here of the text. There's your reason, trapped in his own net of religion. And their children wept and built tombs in the desolate places, because these are the Egyptians now in Africa building the first civilization with their tombs, and formed laws of prudence and called them the eternal laws of God. And the 30 cities remained surrounded by salt floods, now called Africa. Its name was then Egypt. The remaining sons of Urizen beheld their brethren shrink together beneath the net of Urizen. Persuasion was in vain, for the ears of the inhabitants were withered and deafened and cold, and their eyes could not discern their brethren of other cities. Because religion divides people. It makes civilization possible, but only in a certain time and in a certain place, and with a certain groups of ethnicities that are bound geographically, usually separated from the other civilizations, not only geographically, but mentally by the net of religion. Our religion is better than yours. That kind of mentality then comes into being. So Fuzon called all together. Now Fuzon here will be in the role of Moses, as this story resumes in the book of Ahania. So Fuzon called all together the remaining children of Urizen, and the slaves are not just for Blake. Africa contains the first slaves as the Israelites, but in Blake's time also the black African slaves. So he has both in mind. The remaining children of Urizen, and they left the pendulous earth. They called it Egypt, and left it, and the salt ocean rolled and globed. The end of the book of Urizen. All right, so that's it. That's Blake's book of Urizen, and so that sets us up for the book of Ahania, which is much shorter, but actually more dense, I think, and the writing is better, and as we'll see, the mythological images are more compressed as Blake's writing gets better and better over time. So we have his entire cast of characters except for Ahania, I believe. I don't think there's anyone else. So we'll take a look at the book of Ahania in our next video.